Hi, good morning. As Mike has said, clearly staff and staffing is one of our biggest challenges, always has been in good and bad times. And I want to just clarify one thing to start with. Why do we, as an industry, have a high staff turnover? What's the cause of that? I mean, we all would accept, would we, that we do, as an industry, have a high staff turnover. Is there anyone here who doesn't have a high staff turnover? Relatively. Okay, so you've got a good, stable workforce. Yep, good. I'll come back to that in a second. But why then is there a difficulty in this area? Because I suggest the first thing is that it's in a sales environment and selling processes and sales pressures. Typically, in any industry where it's sales driven, there is a churn that tends to take place, not least because the salesmen want more money, because they're money driven, they're money motivated, and if they can get some more around the corner, they'll probably move on. So that is one of the things that we have to address. But on the other hand, it's also true to say that we lose a lot of people because we picked the wrong ones in the first place. And hey, we're supposed to be the experts in this game. And as an industry, certainly in my experience, we are actually not very good at all through to useless. And that really doesn't sit very comfortably with the sort of quality service that most of us feel that we are offering to our clients. Now, we are offering a pre-selection service, not a selection service to our clients. Agreed? So we are putting for them to make a decision, people forward for their consideration. But clearly, if we're picking our own people, it shouldn't be too much of a jump for us to be able to be pretty good at that ourselves. So is it really a matter of cobbler's shoes, where we're supposed to be good and we do advise incredibly well, but we don't follow it through in our own business? Because it certainly hits your profitability, it certainly hits the value of your business very hard. I was just talking to Stephen here and deals that go through, and one of the things which wasn't actually mentioned in our conversation, but undoubtedly is there, is the acquirer is going to be looking at the stability and quality and retention that you have managed to achieve over the last 2 or 3 years at this point of sale, because that's going to be a very high bit of evidence that you're actually running a good business that's worth buying. So I believe actually no one is ever going to solve it, but you can certainly improve it. And turn it on its head. We had some hands go up just now that said we don't have a very high staff turnover. Okay. Retention then. You have a high level of staff retention. Is that good, necessarily? Is it always good? No, it isn't. But what, again, our industry as a whole often is guilty of is that we keep holding on to people because I'm sure he's going to get it right in a minute. We've given him another chance. We've invested all this time. He convinced me he's going to do it. And typically, they don't. Now, that means that they leave, either for their choice or yours. But when they leave, was that the right time to leave, or was it typically something that should have happened a lot earlier? And we'll come back to that. So a high level of staff retention, if you altered that to good staff retention, excellent. But just high retention on its own, not necessarily. I want to just give you, particularly for the people who haven't heard anything from me before, just a quick background history as to why I'm addressing this topic today. At Select Appointments, which was way back in the 80s, we were building from scratch a high street agency chain, and we were therefore competing in what was then a very good market with long-established names. And we went from 0 to a 3 million pre-tax profit in year 4. Now this was pretty pumpy, pretty impressive. Not doing this to get... But what did we do that made a difference? Well, apart from the differentiation, which others will remember I've talked about, the other thing was that we had to select a special set of staff because we had decided that we wanted our staff to be non-recruitment. We wanted to teach them how to do it our way. We didn't want to modify existing habits. We didn't want to try and suppress existing success under a different regime. We wanted to create their success in our regime. So we wanted to have people without any preconceptions, So that, of course, is one option we've all got. And, of course, the big downside of that is that but you don't know whether they can do it yet. They've got no track record in it. So we had to develop something that was going to give us a better chance of judging whether that is likely to occur. We had decided that the managers would have experience in the industry, but there was going to be a very different culture for them to move into, and that had to be something that we had to assess and judge whether, and for them to assess, whether they really wanted to be part of and be consistent with our culture. So we built up a selection process which proved to be really successful. And we honed it over time, and then we applied it to the last company that I worked for before going freelance, which was Abacus, which we again took on a 5-year journey to develop and sell. And we were the top AIM stock, having floated the company immediately on that 5-year plan to try and get the funding behind it, to get the acquisitions that we needed to get into place. But again, the acquiring of good staff was critical, and we applied this same process in Abacus. So that's where it all came from. How many of you, hands up, are expecting to have a higher number in the next 12 to 24 months? I didn't expect there to be any hands down on that one. Right, so you are going to be recruiting and seeking to increase the number of employees over that period of time, and therefore critically selection is going to be important, but also retention of the good ones is going to be important. Good, okay. Let's just have a look then at what you currently do. And my first question is there a structure? Now most people say, oh yeah, of course we've got a structure, but actually the structure is typically pretty loose. Now I'm not going to go around the room and say, so what is your structure? But is it fair to say, any of you say, I'll put my hand up, no, we don't have a structure. So, you all think you've got a structure, and you may well have, fine, okay. My next question is this structure that you have. So we have this interview process, and we do that sort of test on them, and then it goes over to here, and then that happens, and then we make an offer. That, for the sake of argument, is your structure. My question then is it consistent? Does it always occur in the same way? Are the interview processes that people go through to get to the offer stage consistent? Because I ask you this question, if the answer to that is, well, not always, or no, interviews are notoriously bad as a means of assessing people. We know that, but it's one of the most important areas that we've got available to us, so we've got to just make it better, but use it. But if you interview this guy this week, that guy next week, and that lady the week after for this role that you're trying to fill, if the interviews that those 3 people have gone through are not the same and not consistent, how can you possibly evaluate one against the other? Because I suggest you can't, because they're not going through the same process. Now, consistent, therefore, I believe is a very important element in that structure, point 1. Is it thorough? Well, I interview them for 2 hours, and then we take them out to the pub, and we really get to know them, and they come and work at a desk for a day, so that's what we do. Is it thorough? Well, that's fairly thorough. Could it be more thorough? Would it help if it were more thorough? Is it too thorough? Just let's think about that in a moment. Is it objective? Because interviews, one reason they're so bad is they are so subjective. And so you've got to get the process that you're putting them through, which includes the interviews, but there's other stuff I want to add into it, that you're going to give them is a thoroughly objective because it's consistent, and because it's consistent, and if you start to draw up some history of this and some evidence of this, you can start to refine it and make it more accurate, so that you know that if you've asked this question of all 3 of them, and you've asked it already 30 times of other people, you are now starting to get a bit of a feel about the answers that you're getting, because you've got some track record to base it against. You've got some evidence. So it does need to be objective, and I do believe the more thorough and consistent it is, the more likely it is to be successful. And finally, is it measured? Now, if I said to you, over the last 12 months, How successful have you been in acquiring staff? Could you tell me, because you've got evidence there, you've got it measured, or are you just going off the top of your head? Because being successful at hiring and retaining good staff, I believe, is essentially a measurable tool in your armory of management. So I want you to, if you haven't done this, please do this. Put this down as an action point. Analyze your last 12 months. Go back further if you like. List the hires, the dates, the source, where they came from, and then the leavers, the date, the reason why they left. Whose decision was it that they left? Do you have something to learn from it? Now, if you just set that up on a spreadsheet, 3 times I've done it in the last 12 months, they were actually amazed at the results that they got out of it, because they had failed really to understand, because they hadn't measured it, how good or how bad they were being. Because typically, who has heard this story ever in the past where, look, I'm sorry, Fred, we're going to have to let you go. Fred goes. And down the pub the following night, they say, I gather Fred's gone. Yeah, Fred's gone. Can't understand how he stayed so long, they all said, the staff. Now, have you ever heard that before? Because it's very, very common. And the answer is that often the other staff know better than you do that Fred is not pulling his weight, that Fred isn't cutting the mustard, but Fred is no good. But you have allowed it to go on longer. And if you've therefore got a decision where we fired him, you've also got the decision, well, that was a bad selection decision then, wasn't it? You hired him in the first place, now you've decided they've got to go. Something was wrong in the selection process. If they decided to go, were you glad they went? Will you miss them? Were you going to fire them anyway? That's the sort of information that you can start to build up. Now, it's obviously going to be difficult for Kirsten with 2 to build it, but I suggest even at 2, you start building the model so it's in place as you've identified you're going to be hiring more people during the coming year. Now, I've got a figure in this next bullet point, which is a variable. That's why it's in a bracket. How much time and resource do you give it? Would you invest 2 hours a week to buy, now the 120,000 is, I'm using that as a figure, what would you regard as your average GP per fee earner, if you like? I'm trying to get a sort of, it's a fee earner generation. So would you invest 2 hours a week to generate a new fee earner? I guess you would. But do you invest 2 hours a week? Because often what this is, it's a reactive process. It's not a proactive process. You're looking for people, and yes, you do this and you do that, and you've got your LinkedIn and all that stuff, yes. But are you actually getting a structure into trying to find those people and identifying those people? And do you set aside in your mind, on your diary, 2 hours? And on Thursday morning, I will do this for 2 hours. Every Thursday morning. My focus for Thursday morning is finding the right people, and whatever you're going to do in that, which we come to. Do you have a plan to be ahead of your hiring needs? You've all said you're going to hire some more. Is there a plan of how you're going to achieve that? I'm sure you're probably going to say, well, we're expecting to get 1 in quarter 2 and 1 in quarter 3 and 3 in quarter 4, whatever. But is there a plan of how you get them there? That's what you're aiming to get, but how do you get there? Plan it. And whether or not you're currently hiring, if you met an ideal candidate, could you hire them anyway? Now, the answer to that question should be yes, but I know in the past, certainly, when times perhaps haven't been quite so good, I'd love to hire them, but we can't afford to. Well, hopefully, part of your plan is that you have, if you like, a reserve built up so that if this person does arrive, and at the moment it's not in the plan, and it's going to cost you because you're going to have to give them a guarantee or whatever it may be, you can afford to do so because it's the right hire. So just get your ducks in a row and get a plan going. Clearly, you are going to have some sort of target audience in your mind, which brings us back to the point that I mentioned earlier. Do you want recruitment experience or do you not want recruitment experience? Now, is there the requirement of, or the preference of not having previous recruitment experience because you can't afford them? Because they're going to be more expensive, aren't they? Because how are you going to hire someone who hasn't got a track record? If they've got a track record, they've been earning. And if they've been earning, you've got to match it and do better. So they're probably going to be more expensive. Certainly they're going to be more expensive than someone who has got no experience. If they've got sector experience, it's going to be even more important. So track record of what? They need to know if they're going to have recruitment experience. You need to know if they're going to have recruitment experience, where is it, and how accurate is their value to you. Now, you've said you prefer not to have them. Why would you not have someone with a proven track record?
For me, it's more a case of I'd rather spend 6, 12 months training someone to do things our way than trying to retrain somebody who comes with baggage and a preconceived idea.
And do you have the internal resource for that training already available?
Yeah, me.
That's again, okay, fine. But who better than, you know, the guy who runs the show, because it's your business, it's in your mind. If you can't project that out and get people buying into it, it's probably unlikely that a trainer can if you can't. Okay, so that's the people that you target. So what sources do you target? Now, the first one I've got up here, I'm not even going to touch on this because A, I'm out of date on it, B, I don't understand all this LinkedIn, Twitter stuff. Now, the next one I do know something about, and it's been going as long as I have, and that's referrals. Now, I suggest strongly that a referred candidate for business and a referred candidate for employee of yours is likely to start ahead of the game versus the rest of the population. Is that fair? Referrals are hugely important. What exists in your current business to encourage, and I really mean encourage, your current staff or your candidates or even your clients to refer someone to work for you? What is there to encourage them? I don't want the answer, I just pose the question. Because if there isn't, get something. You have got to make that an instantly identifiable and attractive resource for you to plumb into. Referrals really will work. Don't forget your own candidate database, because the candidates in your database, one has to assume, have sector experience that you're dealing with. They wouldn't be in the database otherwise, presumably. Consequently, if you've got candidates in the database, is there not the possibility that those candidates or a candidate might not be a very good consultant for you? Of course. What, again, is there in your system, in your plan, in your process, which encourages your existing consultants to identify and put forward candidates for you to consider to join the company? Now, I'm sure you all want it to happen. Does it happen? And furthermore, if I'm a consultant in your business, am I financially even encouraged to do that? If not, why not? How much does it cost you, certainly if you have a rec-to-rec fee, to get someone on board? And a very sizable bonus of 500 quid, that'll turn their heads. 500 quid if you put a candidate forward whom we take on off the database. Why not? It's peanuts compared to what you're probably going to have to spend in other resources. And your existing employee feels that they've done something useful to the business, it's been recognised, they've been paid for it, good role. Probably you have a little black book, is what I call it, somewhere. You have got a list of names of people whom you've come across, list of names whom you would target for headhunting to be consultants to work for you. And that little black book, however you do it, is worth developing and keeping up to date and remembering to use. Now, if you're going to spend your 2 hours a week trying to find somebody, perhaps an hour of that every week is adding names into that resource and speaking to some of them and fixing up to meet them. And finally, we come to rec-to-rec. Now, who thinks the rec-to-rec industry is really fantastic, superb, state-of-the-art, what we would all wish to belong to as a quality business, right? They are, as a group of people, as a sector of our industry, generally regarded as not very good, and I'm being incredibly polite. And often, I believe that reputation is well deserved. But, hey, is it a resource that you can afford not to have access to? Certainly not. You can't afford not to. And what I think you do is you have to sit back for a moment. Ask yourself, why does the rec-to-rec sector have such a bad reputation? Because I want you to help you to develop a rec-to-rec model which is going to make it work for you positively as opposed to simply last resource. If you analyze the problem of why rec-to-rec has a bad reputation, I believe the major reason is us. We are the client. We are awful clients for rec-to-rec, I believe, mostly. Because we say to rec-to-rec, we're hiring a blah, which they would know what a blah is, and the deal in everybody's mind is, send me some CVs. And typically, as a client, if you just put yourself in the rec-to-rec business for a moment, as a client, what have we done so far? Apart from identifying a vacancy, nothing. Well, how much are you prepared to pay? Well, it depends. Have you got a job spec? What? Don't you know what a blur does? Can you tell me how does your commission system work? No, that's confidential. Now, if you had a client trying to give you a vacancy, you'd start to say, look, we're not going to waste our time on this. We'll sling a few CVs in if there's anything that roughly matches. And if something bites, lovely, and we charge a fat fee for it, which is why we have a bad reputation. But I believe it's our fault most of the time. You need, I suggest, to choose a shortlist by a method, which I'll go through in a minute, of narrowing down a rec-to-rec company or 2 or 3, probably 4, maximum 5, whom you feel that if we work together on this, we could make this a very much more successful operation. And this is how I suggest you do it. And it can be done. I've seen it done. First of all, you're going to clearly visit the rec-to-recs to see what they look like. They are going to visit you to start to understand what you're about. And the object of this exercise, look, we would like to build a relationship with you, rec-to-rec, which is an ongoing quality relationship. We want to find out how you do your candidate sourcing. We want to find out what you do to check out track record. We want to know what your methodology is. We want to know what your fees and rebates arrangements are. And we're drawing a long list down to a short list, and we're then going to work together to produce a model that makes us, for you, your favorite client. We need a proper briefing, as you would wish from a client. We don't like taking a vacancy that is just a bit of wording. We'd like to visit them. We'd like to understand them. We'd like to get a proper brief, find out about the culture. If you can make yourself their favorite client, so that whenever they get a good candidate of the type that would fit in your organization, sector-wise and culture-wise, you are the first person they speak to, then you're starting to get somewhere. Now, put yourself in the rec-to-rec shoes. What would they want to have that as their appeal, if you like, to want to deal with you? Because, dare I say it, as their fees are, we know, very high, practically the first thing all of you will do is to try and get a discount. Well, look, we're going to be recruiting a lot of people this year, so what about a deal? Because instead of 30%, how about 25%? Whatever. Now, hold on a sec. Think about it. You're the client and you're asking for a discount for a short resource. If you were the rec-to-rec company, why would you send your best candidate to a discounted client? I suggest you might even offer a premium if you get this thing together properly, so that you really are their favorite client because they get a better fee out of you. Now, if it's 32.5 instead of 30, that's money, that's big money, but you will have been developing a relationship and you are getting the best candidates from them, and you still have the right not to select. But you're going to get a cream of crop to look at. as opposed to, well, we'll send it out to 6 agencies. They'll want to send them to you first. You then need to agree the submission process. You're going to be working together. So I want them to prepare candidates whom we are going to see. Prepare in the sense of give them information about us, agreed information about us. Not all the information, agreed what we're going to tell the candidates before. I know what they will have, should have told them, and they know what they have got to cover before the candidate arrives. But we do not want the candidates pre-briefed as to the content of our recruitment process, what model we're going to put them through. We can say there are going to be 3 separate interviews, but we certainly don't want them saying the first one's typically with him, he's a real bastard, he's and the second one's with that, and that's... No. Don't feed them, but just get them set up to understand where they're going, but not pre-briefed on it. We also want them to give us candidate feedback after we've seen them, and that's part of the deal. So effectively what we do is we set up a service level agreement between us. We're going to do this, you're going to do that. This is how we work together. We review this every 3 months to see that it's working for both parties to full effect, and we'll see what sort of results we're getting from it. So you can develop and review the strategy, is it working, with the rec-to-rec. Now, has anyone got a relationship with the rec-to-rec that gets close to that at the moment? Any rec-to-rec? Good. Well done. Others? Why not? Must help. Must help. Clearly, you've got to be able to sell yourself because we know that candidates are in short supply. The demand, like you, is in high supply. So you've got to pull yourself out of the mire and show yourselves to be really attractive. So you've got to sell yourself in terms of a brief which is available and perhaps in hard copy form for emailing to candidates about the company, about the culture, and about the personalities. How your package works, including on-target earnings. Now, if you quote a figure for on-target earnings, just as in reverse, we want to make sure that they're not pulling the wool over our eyes in terms of what they're really earning as opposed to what they say they're earning, the on-target earnings must be realistic, must be achievable. And the rec-to-rec consultant now working with you and for you should be able to be convincing about this is a real deal, this is not just a pie in the sky. This is what someone can earn, this is what people do earn. Yeah? Do you have any non-financial benefits? And what are they? And that's in the brief that the candidate is in a position to see by your agreement and set up in advance through the rec-to-rec. What training and career development do you have in the business? And what's your CSR policy? CSR? Absolutely. That's become much more important of late. By of late, I mean the last 5 years. And yet many recruitment companies do have a substantial CSR policy, but probably don't mention it at the stage of trying to attract candidates to them, which is daft, really. It's a waste of time. Okay, so we then have, we hope, a rec-to-rec company or companies, 3, 4, maximum 5, who really regard us as their favourite client and will give us the pick of their crop straight off. We've now got to select from our various sources, which includes rec-to-rec, from candidates we have drawn into consideration. So what are the personality traits that we seek? Now, this is very much a suggested list. A suggested list. It's not the list. I ask the question, and if you haven't, then you should have one. Have you got a list of this sort of thing that you are specifically looking for? If you've got a list of it, then you're in a position to check things off against it. If it's just, well, it's that's what people fit in here. We're bright, extrovert, blah, blah, blah. Let's just have a list and make sure that we can check off against it. Because when you're doing interviewing processes, you've got to be able to look back and say, well, how did he do on this sort of thing? So first one, I was called it PMA, positive mental attitude. Glass half full. Self-motivated, self-disciplined. This is my list, it's not the list. Tenacity and resilience. Well, we'd like to have some sales ability, wouldn't we? Absolutely. And how do you judge sales ability? Come to that. We want empathy with sensitive assertiveness. That sounds pretty pompous, doesn't it? But it's the sort of thing we're looking for. We want the consultant to be able to develop and deliver empathy with candidates and clients, but to be sensitively assertive, don't we? That's what that means. It's simple as that. Certainly they've got to have confidence. We want them to be team-minded. We want them to have a good work ethic. What else? Draw up your list such that it's available, if you like, to sort of tick the boxes to make sure that you've addressed the things that you're looking for. Equally, we need to look at the competencies that we're seeking. Again, this is a suggested list, not the list. So we want to find out their competency in terms of communication. That shouldn't be difficult, but we've got to be able to make sure that we are evaluating it consistently and thoroughly. We want to see their competency in terms of sales ability and being target-orientated. They're probably used to that if they're already working in the industry. If these are people who are not working in the industry, this is critically important, that they feel comfortable with this culture, if you like, which is necessarily in the industry as a whole. Dare I suggest it? Literacy? God, I see some rubbish coming out. And you know, spell checks may help. But when the grammar is all over the place, and if I receive a candidate's resume with a CV commentary on it, and the reason I've submitted this candidate is rubbish English, I don't feel very confident about their judgment on anything else. They should at least be able to write English, I believe, but then I'm old-fashioned. Much more important, no doubt, is IT literacy. Yes, definitely. At certain stages, obviously, their competency in account management is going to be important. Man management, of course, for the managers. What else? And how do we measure them? These competencies are critical. How do we measure them? We come to some thoughts on this now. What evaluation methods do we have available to us? Well, clearly, we have the CV. Now, the CV that is prepared by the candidate and submitted either direct or through a rec-to-rec or through a referral or whatever is their take on themselves, of course. And we all get used to evaluating a CV on what it says or doesn't say or how it says what it says. So that is part of the evaluation process. Instinctive, I suggest, for you. It should be. We then have a CV commentary. Now, if you have resourced this candidate from somewhere other than your rec-to-rec group, I want you to have the CV commentary that the rec-to-rec group should have completed for this candidate. So if a referred candidate comes through, we want to get all that information from the referred candidate as well. And if you glean them from some other source, again, we want that information filled in before we have the chance to see them so that we can establish. Yes, John?
Just ask, could you do, if it's, let's say, a direct candidate,
Yep.
coming through your website, whatever, could you essentially create that CV commentary in some sort of job application?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's a Word document. If you want to come work here, all our people go through this process. We find it very helpful. It's actually quite helpful for you. I mean, sell it to them, but fill this in. And that will be part of your candidature for us. Yes, absolutely. Needless to say, we have interviews. Now, how many interviews, we're going to come to this shortly, but how many interviews and in what order and by whom starts to get into my concern about consistency. Because it, I believe, needs to become a structure which is consistent, and therefore, as I said earlier, you can evaluate people's responses once you start getting through it. Next, some key questions, which I'm going to give some ideas. I mean, I'm sure there's websites giving you all sorts of questions to ask in an interview, and I'm going to give my take on them. But we are going to be asking key questions, always asking each of the candidates those same key questions. That's the consistency we want. I'm a firm believer in role plays and role playing. Who has, as part of their normal structure, role playing as part of the selection process? Hands up. Okay. Now, if you don't, either you don't believe in role plays, or you're frightened of them because people don't like doing them, or you haven't really thought about it. all I would say is that if you develop some role plays and you have them consistent, they are incredibly valuable if they are properly structured at giving you a much better insight into the individual than any amount of paper will do. Because, for instance, communication skills are going to be coming out evidently in the role play that you're conducting. And I'm going to give you some ideas on that. So role plays, I believe, are very important and are part of the process. Psychometrics. Who has any psychometric testing as part of the process? Okay. For everybody, without fail, always. You've got the track record. And you keep them, do you, the psychometrics of the people you take on? Do you keep them of the people you don't take on? Do you? Why? Because we throw them away. Yeah, but it may be that their psychometric was actually better than you think it was. But anyway, we'll come back to that. Psychometrics, if you're used to them, you want them, that's fine, but it's clearly one evaluation method. The next one is references. Now, who in their normal client-facing business model reference checks their candidates? Please, hands up. The referencing that you're doing is with whom? Now, is it with the immediate superior in a previous employment? Or is it with personnel? Typically. Supervisor? Who does it with personnel happily? Absolutely no point, I don't believe. Yeah, okay. So you really need to try and get to that individual. And this is a verbal? Or is it a written? Emaily? Verbal? Emaily? Depends. If you possibly can achieve it verbal every time, of course from the sales point of view that's going to be a lot stronger, but you also get more information. Anyway, separate issue of the reference checking and the reference call is a whole big separate ball game. But I do think that the references that you're going to take on your candidates is something which should be an essential part of the process of these potential consultants. Next, what about trying to make sure that they actually attend your offices and work a desk for a couple of hours? Now, I accept that is often very difficult to achieve. But if you can achieve it, it does make a hell of a difference. Now, particularly for non-experienced people, this is a critical opportunity to see whether they fold or whether they actually can do this thing and take it by the bull by the horns. But at the desk would be one of, may not be standard, it may be something you only do for these people, whatever, but it's in your process. And try and make it consistent. What I call meet the family. Now, this would be typically well down the line, so we're now getting pretty warm on this individual. We're thinking this is a potential that we could take this person on. And we say, right, well, what we'd like to do is to perhaps come and have a drink with the rest of the team at the end of play on Wednesday. Could you make that? And they get to see the rest of the team and get not your take, but the team's take on things, because they'll start talking about it. So what's it like working there? Is he as full of it as he sounds as if he is, or whatever? But that starts to get some sort of... Now then clearly you need the feedback from the team as to what they felt of it. Now the fact that they said, "Woo, don't like him at all," and you're convinced he might be... It's up to you. That's your call. But it's another input, another form of evaluation. And as we've agreed, quite often the colleagues have been a better judge of people than you have once they've been working with them. We don't have the privilege yet of working with them.
Just a question on that.
Yeah, sure.
What's the best way to get the feedback from your colleagues? Is it to do it individually or collectively? Because we found certainly doing it collectively, people's opinions are swayed and they don't necessarily give.
I'd strongly feel individually. Right. But as it is, would be a consistent part of the selection process. Your people will have already been through this themselves, and therefore they know that it's part of the process. And we make it clear to everybody that, we're going to get him to come along. We really value your opinion on him. We'll ask you individually afterwards what you feel about it. Don't grill them, just make them feel at ease, of course, but answer any questions they have honestly and openly. We're not hiding anything. So, but give us your feedback. But one at a time, yes, I agree. It's hopeless because mouth will continue the meeting. Okay? And finally, I believe you should have a system of scorecards. Now, at each process, each stage of the process, it is possible to generate a scorecard. I'll come, once you understand where I'm going to lead with this. So, interview 1 has a scorecard. Interview 2 has a scorecard. Role plays have a scorecard. Where the things that the competencies, that whatever it is that you're looking for are identified, and you are able to assess the individual against that on a scorecard. Now, this is an objective, much better than subjective, an objective way of getting some feedback on it. And of course, the scorecard is literally what it says on the tin. It's numeric, it's not opinion. He scored 80. Okay? The norm is 65, so 80 is good. Normally it's 90. Well, 80 is okay, but not great. Fine.